Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, new paradigms for a new world where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here 9 times a week, Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming live at all those times at richarddugan.com. We are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, as well as YouTube, where you can watch these conversations. I hope that you will take time to subscribe and click notifications so that when a new conversation is posted, you'll be notified and you'll be able to tune in, listen in, and learn, and be entertained and inspired. A reminder that Choices, which is my book, 5 Steps for Life, it's available on Amazon.com in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle with Audible, soon to be released. We also ask that if you can support the work that we are doing financially, we do have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And when they ask for an email address to whom you're sending, please go to richard@richarddugan.com. That's the email address. If you go to richarddugan.com, there is also a link directly to PayPal so that you can send us whatever support you can. And we thank you to those who have helped and to those who will help. We also ask that you take time during this decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still, small voice. And with that, we now take you to our very special interview and guest here on Tell Me Your Story. And welcome to Tell Me Your Story. I am Richard Dugan, your host. I am here with a very special guest here on the program, Linda Moran. She's written a very interesting book, which is close to my heart from the standpoint of my father and probably even my eldest sister, who both have passed. The Perks of Hospice, Stories of Love, Life, and Loss. And I want to welcome you to the program, Linda. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be able to just have these chats. I really enjoy them.
Well, there are so many conversations that our society refuses to have, especially following the pandemic. They were talking about the next pandemic, dealing with our mental health and wellness. But one of the other aspects that we've been talking about on this program since I've been doing it, even before, and even before. And I put it this way: this particular subject is near and dear to my heart, and that is the conversation surrounding death and dying.
Yes.
And all respect to Bernie Siegel, Dr. Bernie Siegel, who I've had on this program. Following the passing of his wife, we were talking, and I made the statement. I says, something along the lines of, after your wife's transition. He says, what transition? What are you talking about? She died. Why can't we just use the word die? And so forth. And I don't disagree with him, but it also it's very charged energetically. And so I like to use the word transition or passed on and so forth. Moved. I mean, there's all kinds of phrases.
Yeah.
I mean, I had heard that my father was in hospice care the last, I'm going to probably say, month or so of his life. I'm pretty sure my sister as well. She was suffering stage 4 of cancer, breast cancer, and so forth, and it had metastasized throughout her body and what have you. I know that a dear friend of mine, his wife just passed away recently this year, and she was also under hospice care. One of the subjects I want to talk about, and we're just going to address it very, very briefly. Sure. We both know that in this country, the issue of when life begins is huge. It is enormous. My assessment, my observation is that until we can understand and define when death occurs, what are the parameters, there's no way we can define when life begins. And I'm not asking for you to define it per se, but I know hospice which I've been through counseling with hospice since my father's passing. They offer that
Hmm.
free to relatives, and I'm grateful for that. And it's one of the perks of hospice, I guess.
Yes.
It's very nice that they have that available. And I've noticed too that you don't just sit there and talk about. That's well, I suppose some do. They will sit there for session on session about the loss of their loved one.
Hmm.
And in the last 3 or 4 years, I've lost a lot. I've lost a number of people. My best friend of 53 years, and I'm 64. So we met in school and we went through a lot of stuff. And when I think about him, I can only laugh because we had so much fun together.
Hmm.
There are times when, yeah, something happens in my life. I want to call Doug and, oh,
Yes.
wait a minute. And I still have his number in my phone, you
Hmm.
know. Um, Years ago, before the cell phone, uh, I had numbers memorized in my head.
I know. I
You know,
know.
times have
There's-
changed. But let me ask you about your connection. We'll start there. Your connection to hospice, and obviously the how this particular book, "The Perks of Hospice: Stories of Love, Life, and Loss," came about.
Well, my husband has had medical issues for years. And when we moved back to Vermont, for one reason, we came back because we knew the healthcare was better. Um, and he underwent aneurysm surgery. And then 2 years later, he had open heart surgery. And during the open heart surgery, he had a stroke, caused some speech aphasia. And it just seemed at that point, nothing the doctors did was really making him better, or at least increasing his energy, things like that. He had to go to cardiac rehab for 36 weeks. And it lasted 4 weeks for him because he would go, they'd take his blood pressure, and they said, "Oh, your blood pressure is too high. Sit there, calm down. We'll take it again." And they took it, and it was even higher. So they sent him home because his blood pressure was too high to exercise, but he needed to exercise in order to keep his blood pressure down. So that was our first indication of being yelled at because something wasn't right and we couldn't fix it. Um, so it just seemed like he ping ponged between problem after problem after problem. And 2 years after the open heart surgery, things had gotten, the kidney failure. He had a mass on his kidney. He was refusing dialysis, refusing chemotherapy. And we'd gone to his primary care doctor. She was just absolutely amazing. And she said, "Sounds like you've had enough of, going to appointments and being sent home and appointment after appointment and tests." And he said, "Yeah, I'm really tired of it all." And she says, "Well, I'm going to give you a referral for hospice." And that is usually for people who have been given 6 months to live. Um,
Mm.
so it was like, oh, okay. We walked out, and it's like hospice is kind of a punch in the gut because you really don't know what it means. And then the next day, the phone calls started coming about interviews. Are you eligible? And here's what will come with it. You'll get dinners once a week from restaurants. You'll have a spiritual caregiver. You'll have a counselor. You'll have volunteer drivers. You'll have someone to come in and clean. Um, and then when it's time, if you need to, you'll be able to go to respite house, which is just, you've got apartments there. It's just wonderful. And you don't have to do anything. The staff is there to take care of you, and you can just be with your wife. That's where the title Perks of Hospice came from. Um, However, when it comes to hospice and the 6 months, we are outliers in that respect. We spent 2 years in hospice, and that's highly unusual. Some people spend a couple of hours to a couple of weeks to maybe a month or two. And we spent 2 years. And I didn't realize how unusual that was until I started attending other family gatherings and learning that, oh, they'd been there for like 2 days and then died. And it's like, wow, we were really lucky. But I think it was the universe had a plan for me to kind of know everything I needed to know about hospice so I could share it. And I learned a lot. So that's how the book came about. And I kept notes throughout our whole process. lists of doctors, medicines, uh, what care protocols were. And that was really important. And what came about from all of that is the need to advocate for your loved one, regardless of what stage you're in. I don't think doctors recommend hospice early enough. I think doctors are just so busy trying to fix things, because that's why they're doctors, that they don't look at getting you into hospice to live out the rest of your life the way you want to, in comfort, whatever that might be. And I think one of the best, I've read two books that were really key for me. One was Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, and he has great ideas for what to say to doctors when you need straight answers. And the other one was by Rabbi Steve Letter from LA. He wrote The Beauty of What Remains. And he talks about what you were mentioning, the importance of stories at the end. And when you were talking about your friend, all I could think of was, we don't have people to share those stories with now. You wanted to call your friend and share that.
Yeah.
And he's not there. And, I'm the last of my generation, and just friends who don't know all of me. There's no one there to share.
Yeah.
And that's where I think writing about your experiences is a way of sharing with others who maybe could learn something or benefit from some little rays of light as to what's in the future.
Well, Linda Moran's my guest here on the program. We're talking about The Perks of Hospice, her memoir, if you will, or a memoir, stories of love, life, and loss, as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and what I find interesting is in what much of what you have already said is that we all grow up with a particular perspective on death and dying. And I remember it was probably my first experience with the subject when my grandmother, and it may have even been before that, my grandfather, he passed away before she did. But there was a distance because we got the phone call from Florence, Arizona, back in Phoenix. Whereas my grandmother was with us. It was a Thanksgiving weekend. She'd spent Thanksgiving Day with us and dinner and everything. And that night they were showing her favorite movie, The Sound of Music, which she took us to at a drive-in in Florence when we were a little bit younger. She took us to see that at a drive-in theater, which was really quite remarkable. That night, she went to bed. According to one of my sisters, she got up and she made a trip to the bathroom, came back and laid down, went to sleep, and never woke up. So there she was in our home. And my parents, they, from what I recall, they did not keep us from her and seeing her lifeless body and so forth. At the church, at the funeral, of course, I was almost ushered out because I was so upset. I don't think I was more than, I want to say, 9 or 8 or 9 or 10 or something like that. Young. That was probably my first experience in that regard. Since then, of course, I've had the loss, of course, as I mentioned, of my eldest sister, our neighbor across the street, who he and I worked on transferring classical music from reel to reel and vinyl to the computer.
Oh, wow.
And he lived to be 94. He was a percussionist with the Utah Symphony Orchestra under a conductor by the name of Maurice Abravanel. And they used to have here in Santa Barbara, actually, I think maybe it's Montecito, at, now I can't remember the name of the college. Lord have mercy. Anyway, they had a Bravanel Hall. And I also worked with Westmont College. There we go. There it is. Thank you, universe. And I had the great pleasure of interviewing my friend, because obviously he had worked with Abravanel. And I was producing these little vignettes for another a classical music station here in Santa Barbara, KDB, that has since been sold and call letters changed and everything. And he helped me to select the music that we wanted to incorporate into the little vignette where Abravanel was conducting. That was a lot of fun. Lost a dear friend, a programmer on our radio station here in Santa Barbara in February of 2000, I want to say 21. And then, of course, my wife's remaining sibling passed away in early March of that year, and then my eldest sister passed away late March of that year. The following year, my father, and then my best friend, and then another dear friend.
Hmm.
This year, I should say, this year, the dear friend. Um, I'm not going to say that it gets easier, but one of the things that I don't know if I want to say it makes it easier, but helps me to process it, not stuffing the emotions,
Hmm.
is my understanding that they aren't really gone. And that comes from my philosophical perspective, which has changed over the 64 years I've been on this planet.
Hmm.
I'm curious as to your transition in terms of your understanding of what it was years and years and years ago and what it is today.
I come from a very dysfunctional family.
Ooh.
Nobody said anything to anybody about who was sick, who was no longer around. So all of a sudden, people just weren't at the holiday tables. And oh, well, they're just not here. They're gone. So I was 16 or 17 before I was at a Latin mass for um, an older aunt and realized that, oh, that wasn't Latin I was hearing, it's Lithuanian. And I had no idea of that kind of connection that the family had. When my father died very suddenly, I had seen him at lunch one day. He went back to the office, had a myocardial infarction, and that was it. His That was the only school year in the 40 years that I taught that I had the Tuesday before Thanksgiving off. So I was able to fly out to Arizona or to Ohio. They were in Ohio at the time. And so I was there when he died. And I did not know what to do. I had no clue because I had not been to enough things to know what to do, how to behave, what to say. And in my family, girls didn't cry. Boys didn't cry, but I certainly did not cry. So it was, I don't think I'm alone in that kind of upbringing because I'm a little earlier in you and than you. And in the 50s, 60s, there wasn't a lot, I don't think, of filling the kids on, and you certainly didn't go to funerals.
Mm.
And so, I have lost colleagues, friends. I don't think I ever learned to grieve for my dad, and I'm doing some work on that right now. But with my husband, with Dean, what we had talked about was, I guess it's philosophical, but in my mind, it's also science. The soul is energy, and energy doesn't disappear. It transitions into something else. And we talked about he would always be with me because his energy would not dissipate. And I believe that, not as strongly as I would like to, but I find that when I meditate with certain meditations, I can feel him supporting me, and I can feel him cheering me on with some of the things that I'm doing now. Um, so it was different for me than for a lot of people. Uh, so I'm learning how to grieve. I'm learning how to accept death. Uh, just learning.
Mm. I used to think that if we could just not get so attached to people, that it wouldn't hurt so much.
Hmm.
However, it doesn't work that way.
No.
I remember when my first wife, who was totally blind, she was walking down the gangplank, if you will, of an airplane with her first guide dog. Um, that I looked at her coming down the gangplank with her black lab Yora. That was her name, Yora, Yora dog.
Yeah.
Um, I said, I'm not going to get close to that dog because I know what's going to happen in 8 or 10 or 12 years, you know.
Hmm.
Well, we didn't have to experience that because at a certain point, guide dogs for the blind retires the dog
Retires.
before they
Yeah.
pass. And they, so to speak, put them out to pasture,
Hmm.
allowing them to live their final years or, in a home, maybe with the puppy raisers or whoever, so they're not working anymore. They can just relax and so forth. So we didn't experience that aspect of it. Um, my I would say my first dog, and this does apply to pets too, what we're talking about. His name was Alfie, and he was actually given to my first wife and I by her best friend. And I remember after the divorce, we actually tried to bring Alfie into our home. And when I say our, my second wife and I, when we were in Phoenix. But she, my second wife, had a pack of 4 Siberian Huskies. They were a
Oh, wow.
sled team, and they weren't having it, and neither was he. I mean, they were fenced, and we let him out in the backyard, and he was drooling the whole time, and that's a sign of fear because he can
Hmm.
sense the other dogs. So I wasn't able to take him with me, and it was, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago when I last spoke with my former wife that she told me they had to put him down because he had become so aggressive. And I thought, well, I can understand why he became aggressive because he didn't want to be there.
Hmm.
He wanted to be with me, and I wish that he could have. I wish we could have worked that out. But
Yeah.
that was sad too. But when we're talking about this conversation, dealing with this subject of death and dying, um, hospice. Have you looked into their protocols, their procedures? Uh, I know this is a weird comparison here. You talked about how, you were in hospice, you and your husband, and for like 2 years, and it got me to thinking about like the Make-A-Wish Foundation and how
Hmm.
usually it's for terminally ill people. Well, what happens if you aren't terminally? You live beyond that deadline that they gave you, that kind
Yeah.
of thing. Um, but
We had some interesting things happen initially in our
mhm,
intake. Um, Once we were approved, uh, when our case care manager came, she said, "Look, you're not dying today. You're not dying tomorrow. You have a ways to go." And we started looking at the end stages of life. And one of the things they did was look at all of Dean's medications. He was on a lot. And
mm,
they took away anything that was not necessary. He didn't need the triglycerides medicine. He didn't need cholesterol medicine. There were so many things that he didn't need. And what we noticed after about 3 weeks of this was he had an appetite back. And he hadn't had an appetite back since his open heart surgery.
mm,
And my husband was the kind who would Google everything, says
mm.
side effects of heart medicines. And every single one of the ones that he was on was appetite suppressant was one of the side effects. Got rid of those, and he was eating again. And just the care that they gave. He had anger issues. They got him some short-term depression meds. But what they said when we checked in, well, when they approved us, was that you're here as long as you need to be. If you feel you want to continue with some testing or some other treatments, We can take you off hospice. You can go and do those and see what happens. And if you want to come back to hospice, you can. But at that point, he was so tired of doing things and trying all these new treatments and everything that he was just tired of it. He just didn't want to have to spend the energy. He wanted to be able to go for drives, just, sit outside, listen to music, do our fiber art together. He just didn't want to deal with everything else. So that was fine with them. And after about the first year, he started having minor strokes in there. So they would provide the therapy that he needed for the speech, and they were there for everything. But it's almost ironic in that the 6-month terminal period with the hospice care kind of contradicted each other, because he got such good care that he actually was feeling better for a while. Kidneys were still failing, blood pressure was still an issue, but he was more alert and able to do more things. So I'm doing more research into it now. But at the time, one of the hardest things with the 2 years is realizing that you're grieving for 2 years that you're going to lose your partner. And I kept thinking, oh my God, what is it going to be like after he's gone? And my social worker said, it's going to be worse. And boy, was she right. But the grieving beforehand helped me realize kind of what I was headed into. But the hardest part of the long-term hospice that I don't think you see when it's 2 days to maybe a week or a month, for those last 2 months or so, and then the 3 weeks in hospice, every day I saw less and less of him. And that was just so painful, because he had passed the point of being able to take matters into his own hands. But he was also sleeping more and not really cognizant of things. So it taught me that there's a lot more to hospice than just the couple of hours or a couple of weeks that you are with them, that they will be with you as long as you need to. And if you get better, and they've had that happen, then they let you go and you lead your life as though nothing had happened. So that's one of the reasons why I think ultimately we were in hospice as long as we were, because I learned a lot of stuff about it, about what that meant for us as a couple, what that meant for our friends, what that meant for people coming over to say goodbye. And the dean, in most cases, was able to be cognizant of what was going on.
Linda Moran is my guest. We are talking about her book. We're discussing hospice, and we're talking about, believe it or not, folks, the perks of hospice, stories of love, life, and loss as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and Linda Moran is my guest. I want to ask you, you made a comment that kind of spurred a thought. Following my father's loss of his eldest daughter, my eldest sister, back in late March of 2022, he made a comment. First of all, of course, as probably most parents would, of the loss of a child. Parents aren't supposed to bury their children. But he made another comment as well to my mother. My mother shared this story with me, how he was tired. I mean, my father passed at 91, and he was tired. He says, I just don't want to be here. Now, I've shared this story before about my father's health. He had great health. My mother said he had the blood pressure of a 20-year-old. Now, when he was on the downhill side, they took him into the hospital on a Saturday. They ran a bunch of tests, and he died 5 days later. However, they had diagnosed him with early onset dementia and Parkinson's.
Mm.
But he made the comment that he didn't want to be here. So my mother, knowing his health, said, "Okay, so what are you going to die of?" And again, he was doing fine at the time of this conversation.
Hmm.
Um, there comes a point, it seems to me, and you made the reference to the medical community trying to fix, trying to,
Hmm.
keep a person alive. And my father also shared with me years earlier, he says, eat, drink, and be merry in moderation because nobody gets out of this world alive.
Right.
And obviously referring to the physical body. But I'm curious as to some of, if, uh, if I'm remembering correctly, and this was shared at my father's memorial by one of my sisters who was there before my father was no longer conscious. He was still alive, but no longer conscious.
Hmm.
He said some words to the effect that to my mother, that I love you with my whole life, kind of thing. Can you share with us Dean's last words to you or sentiments? Is that something that you can share with us? Or is that too personal?
No, I just trying to think if I'm going to cry or not. His last,
And that's okay too, by the way.
yeah, his last probably 48 hours. Uh, he was burning hot, tossing and turning. They had put him on a full-time morphine drip. I'd been talking to him, just, in his ear saying, "It's okay, honey. You've made me strong. You can go. It'll be okay." But he was beyond speech.
Mm,
What was amazing that happened was that a neighbor of ours brought me back to the respite house because I can no longer drive, so I depend on people to get me places. So she brought me up. I had gone home to take care of some business and then was going to go back. And she said, "Do you think Dean would mind if I sang to him?" And I said, "Oh, he'd love that." Um, so she sang a really beautiful a cappella spiritual. And Dean was laser focused on her, laser. You could just see his eyes never moved off of her.
mm,
And there was communication between the two. You could kind of see it.
mm-hmm,
And it was beautiful. And that was at 11 a.m. in the morning. And 12 hours later, he had passed.
mm,
And the comfort I got was that the last thing he was conscious of was music, because the
mm,
art that we did was very, very special to him. But um, we held hands for most of the last 2, 3 days when he was just in and out and everything. And he just wasn't really capable of talking. But that music was just amazing. And I had artwork that we had made together was on his bed, pictures that we had taken. One of the things I recommend people doing is putting together, the little print on demand books of all the places that you've been. So
oh,
that you
yeah.
have something to look at
Mm-hmm.
and talk about, especially if dementia is involved. And for Dean, it was just really, we could talk and he would say, "Well, where were we there? Oh yeah, I remember that." And that was bringing about those stories and memories that Rabbi Letter had talked about in his book. But no, there were really no last words except probably a squeeze of the hand.
Mm-hmm.
And
Were you there at the moment of his passing?
yes, I was.
What was your awareness? My wife has held animals at their passing, one in particular, and she tells me she felt that essence, that spirit of that animal go right through her.
Um, I was by my bedside. I had both of his hands in mine. Um, he was having a terrible time breathing. It was like he had run 2 marathons at the same time.
Mm.
And the nurse was coming in and checking on the morphine, and she said, "Yeah, it's we're close. We're close." And this was, oh, I was so tired. And I remember just putting my head down on my hands, closing my eyes just for a minute or so. And then she says, "I think he's passed. I'll go get my stethoscope." And I was appalled because I had missed the very last breath. And I said that to her. I said, "Oh my God, I missed his very last breath." And she said, "That's how he wanted it. That's what he did. That's how he wanted it.
Mm.
And I'll let you spend some time with him, as much time as you need. And then we'll get him ready for when uh, the funeral home would come for him." And I remember just grasping a hold of him and sobbing,
Mm.
sobbing. Um, I had the one real regret that I have is the voice of my mother coming back to haunt me, as it had for 60 some years, saying, "Oh, get over it. They have work to do. Stop crying. Let them do their job." And that's kind of how I was learning to grieve. Just get over it. People have work to do. So I called for them and they said, "Don't you want more time?" And I said, "No, it's okay." And I think back now thinking, oh God, I wish I'd had just a little bit more time, on the off chance that the spirit was still there.
Mm.
And I know from my friend who just lost her companion dog a couple of months ago,
Mm-hmm.
just being there, and she knew, she could feel when he went. And maybe that's how he wanted it. But boy, I have such anger towards my mother for that teaching that is in the back of the head,
Mm.
and um, not learning how to grieve early on, and then not being able to grieve the way you want to.
Yeah.
So he had music and art at the end, and those were things we did together, loved together. Um, I have to think that that was enough.
Linda Moran is my guest. The Perks of Hospice is her book, and this is Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and I'm very grateful for Linda Moran being with us here on the program to share her story. And I'm certainly touched by the expressions of emotion that she has shared. I know that there are two elements to this program that happen. Number one is animals will somehow appear. They, if someone has a cat or a dog, somehow they manage to find their way over and into the frame. And I tell the guest, hey, don't worry about it. It's okay. They just want to just check things out, and then they'll probably lay down and be quiet or move on, what have you. The other is the expression of emotion. One of the things that has perplexed me is I've never heard anybody ever apologize for laughing, for feeling joy and happiness. I've heard people apologize for getting angry and crying. And I'm thinking, why are you apologizing? It's okay. That's part of the human experience. So I appreciate the fact that you are open to sharing yourself in that way. I've had a few of my own moments on this program. And I think about like my father, and I'll get into a conversation, and somehow something that we were talking about just triggers, and bam. And I had a time when I was in the bathroom in the shower, and I just lost it, and I stood there
Mhm.
for like 5 minutes and just. But I don't. I heard my eldest sister's voice following her passing, and I mean maybe an hour or two. So and I don't hear my father's voice audibly. I get impressions. And
Mhm.
sometimes I'm speaking to myself and I'm going, where did that come from?
Yeah.
And usually it's one of those pep talks that I'm trying to give myself, to
Oh,
boost
yeah.
my morale of sorts. And I'm going, oh, okay, that was my dad. Thank you. Um, I'll come across his pictures on my phone every so often. My elder sister, Cecilia, she she and my mother and another of the nieces were at the funeral home, and she took a picture of him. And then I asked her if she would go over, tell him that I love him, and give him a kiss on the head, on the forehead. And one of my nieces took a picture of that, showing that she carried out my wishes, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
because I couldn't be there. But I also knew that from my perspective, again, this is my philosophical bent. It didn't matter where I was. He was with me. Now he was with me everywhere. I didn't have to pick up the phone to call him
Mm-hmm.
in Phoenix
Mm-hmm.
anymore. I could call him anytime I wanted. And that's for me, that's kind of cool to think
Well,
about.
I've had people say to me here in our senior complex, well, why do you still have your ring on? I said, well, as far as I'm concerned, I'm still married.
Hmm.
He's just off on a vacation, but he's with me. And that every now and then I will end up doing something, and it's basically a foobar for me. And then when it finally works out, I just look up and say, I know you're laughing. I know you're laughing hysterically because you taught me how to use that. And I was putting together a bookshelf, and it had an Allen wrench, and it was awful getting all the things in. And my hands were so sore, and half an hour, I finally said, I'll finish it in the morning. Well, in the morning, I picked it up, and for some reason, I picked it up by the longer end,
Mhm.
and then all of a sudden, I had leverage, and I was like, yeah, I know, you're laughing. You're laughing. So my friends all know that talking about him is fair game.
Yeah.
And, we share stories that we have in common as a way of being able to pass them on.
Yeah.
But that's one of the things I liked about The Beauty of What Remains is the importance of stories, because there may not be anyone left to hear those stories after a while.
Well, here's the beautiful thing of where we are today technologically. Number one, you've written the book, it's now in print. But at the same time, and I'm sure you've probably heard this saying that a person never really dies as long as there are people alive who remember them.
Mm-hmm.
And from my standpoint, my father will never really die because he is immortalized in an interview that I did in 2015,
Oh,
with he and my mother.
mm-hmm.
Um, and so I'm very fortunate in that regard. I can go back and hear his voice, listen to him when he was obviously extremely lucid. You know, he was very attentive and alert and so forth. Still in his 80s, and so that's an advantage that not only I, but it's available for anybody to listen to on the
Mm-hmm.
website richarddugan.com, but for my family as well. And I remember when I finished the interview, I posted it and I interspersed it with music, different songs that I thought really were appropriate. I mean, and we talked about a lot of stuff. We talked about their faith, their religion,
Mm-hmm.
music, huge part of our family. um, a lot of different other things as well. And so I'm very happy about that. But you have a book. I'm curious if it's available in Audible yet.
No, I hadn't thought about that, but I guess I should.
I would love after this interview to talk to you about that.
Okay.
I produce Audible books. I'm in the process now of recording my book.
Mm-hmm.
And people will be able to hear pieces of it following interviews on Tell Me Your Story. I'm going to incorporate sections, but it's available on Amazon and so forth, as is your book too, I'm sure. Available.
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, the publisher, Wheatmark. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, when you were talking about, I hate it when those senior moments happen. And you had that important little piece and now it's gone. But yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Doing the book was important. Oh, I know what it was. I taught for over 40 years in the public school system.
Hmm.
And I have students from pretty much every district that I taught in that I am still in contact with. And every now and then I'll see a thank you pop up on Facebook, and that makes me feel really, really good to know that. And I have a foster son who's one of my students, to know that you sometimes wonder if you make a difference. And I know that I have, and I know that the book is going to help. And that's all I really want. I just want to make a difference for other people. And that's what's leading to this second book, because I think there's going to be an awful lot coming down the road health-wise that we may need help understanding, even just the terminology. It's like, but yeah, I hadn't even thought about Audible.
Yeah, well, we can chat about that here in a little bit. We're talking with Linda Moran and her book, which I think is really, I love the title. It's almost, it sounds a little strange to some folks. The Perks of Hospice?
I
Really?
know.
Seriously? But
it's all
the
those years
reality,
of teaching writing to students.
yeah, exactly. And I want to talk about that a little bit before we wrap things up here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, and it is really a pleasure to have Linda Moran here on the program to talk about the perks of a hospice, but also we'll talk a little bit about her background as an educator and so forth. And you mentioned a mentor of yours. And one of the things that I find so interesting, and it's one of the reasons I got into this business of broadcasting back in 1979. And then I decided to go to broadcast school because I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to raise the bar. One of the interesting things for me was I worked for 15 years in Phoenix for a Christian radio station. Actually, I'd have to call it more religious than Christian because, believe it or not, they had programming on there that wasn't quote unquote Christian. They actually had a program on Sunday nights that I used to have to play. Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam.
Oh,
yeah, that was fascinating education. But
yeah.
one of the things that got me during that whole time was when they would refer to things, possessiveness in regards to Jesus. And they would constantly use this terminology to talk about his carpentry, his family, whatever. And they would always say Jesus's. And I'm going, that's wrong. According to what I learned in as far as grammar is concerned, if it ends in an S, there's an apostrophe if it's in print, or you just say Jesus, mother, father, table, apostles.
Or the mother of Jesus. You turn it into the,
you could do that too.
Latin. Yeah.
And then there was when I sent my book off to my sister, Cecilia, to proofread, it came back and I had this one section where I had a list of things. And I had, the list was item 1, comma, item 2, comma, item 3, comma, item 4, comma, and item 5. But when it came back, it had item 1 and item 2 and item 3 and item 4 and item 5. And I'm going, what? I almost called her. And then I thought, wait a minute, do some research. And I did. And it turns out both ways are correct.
Yep.
You had a mentor by the name of Joan Daniels.
Oh, she was my Latin teacher.
Yeah. Tell us about her as well as what you have brought forward from your experiences with her as your mentor, if you will, in school.
Oh God, this is so cool to be able to talk about her. She was an incredible woman. I loved Latin. It was like one big puzzle, and I could put every single piece together. And I just fell in love with everything about it. And the beginning of second year Latin, and I go into second year Latin, and it seems like I'm the only one in the class who kind of remembered first year Latin. So she pulls me aside after school and says, or after class, and says, if you can come in an hour early every day, you can go into Latin 3 while you're taking Latin 2. You can do that. I thought, cool. And she was probably the first person who believed that I was smart, I was intelligent, I could do these things, and no one could tell me I couldn't. And we moved the beginning of my junior year in high school from New Jersey to New York, which was very difficult when you've been with kids for 10 years. And I was able to get back to see her a number of times, and each time say thank you. And the last time I stopped to see her was 1986. And I caught her at the end of class, right at the end of the day, and she had a couple students there. And she looked at me and she says, "Oh my God." And she turns to the other students and said, "Look at her. That's Linda Moran. That's Linda Lemke, my maiden name." She said, "That's the only student I have ever had take 2 years of Latin in the same year. Nobody has done it since." And I was like, cool. But I know my grammar because of her, maybe to the point of being absurd. But I mean, when my media agent did the press release, took out my draft, she took out all my Oxford commas. And I said, "Oh, I'm going to miss my Oxford commas." And she said, "That's okay. A lot of people put them back in." So, my kids called me the grammar queen because if they had something, I could answer it for them.
Yeah.
So she taught me the pure joy of learning. And
well,
I'm always grateful to that woman.
I had a lot of mentors, but they were more because I made them such. I had an algebra instructor in high school, Miss Summers, and I loved algebra so much so that I was way ahead in the book. To which, when she found that out, she said, "Look, you're doing great. You're doing fine. As long as you keep doing the work, you don't have to come in to class." That was a mistake.
I was going to say, oh, a forward-thinking teacher.
Oops. Because eventually I started falling behind, and I went back to class, and I got caught up and everything. But several people in my life, a dear friend who's since passed, Ramona Richards. She was in the entertainment industry. She willed to me. I have 3 huge boxes and 1 small box filled with cassettes of interviews that she has done.
Oh.
That I have posted on SoundCloud. They're not public yet. They will be eventually. But it was really something because she taught me so much and we had conversations of a very metaphysical or spiritual nature. And I remember mentioning to her that, I says, well, you're one of my mentors. And she said, I don't, no, I don't like that word. She says, I'm your friend. Okay. Because she didn't I don't think she liked the titles. She actually gave me one of my other metaphysical primers. One that I had already found was Autobiography of a Yogi. The other one was that she gave me on my 21st birthday, which I still have. I'm 64. The Impersonal Life by James Benner, written back in the 1930s. It's funny, in about 7 years, I'm going to have to say 1930s.
I know.
Be in the 2030s. Anyway.
Yeah, I've been blessed with a roommate in my first teaching position. I was on Maui, and she was the drama teacher, and I got involved, and just watching her craft these amazing productions and what she expected of the kids every single time. And that, just watching her for the 3 years that I was on Maui, I brought back to my classes the need for high expectations. And I
Yeah.
always said to the kids, of course you can do this. I believe that you can, and you will.
Yeah.
And that was always tried to make that my message to my
Yeah.
students. But yeah, we've
Well,
been blessed in so many ways.
yeah, one of my pet peeves, and this is primarily in the broadcast industry regarding grammar, is when phone numbers are given. And there have been times when I've slipped, but for the most part, when living in Phoenix, the area code was 602.
Hmm.
In California, here in Santa Barbara, the area code is 805. If they use the word "oh," I'll just put it that way. I'll
Hmm.
say, "Show me where on the phone the keypad is "oh." Show me.
Yeah.
And then they show me where it is, and I'm going, that's not "oh," that's a zero.
Hmm.
The reason why I say wanting to raise the bar is because the problems that we have, especially right now, are that we have no clue as to how to communicate with one another because we are all using a whole different lexicon,
Hmm.
a grammar. I mean, look at our texts. LOL. Okay, I
I
get it.
know. I know.
Um, LMK. Let me know.
Yeah.
On and on and on. And when I am sending an email, I got to tell you, I try to make sure that it's grammatically correct.
Every comma is there. I don't
Yeah.
care. No abbreviations. It's got to be right. We share
And
that.
let me tell you, spell check is sometimes no help whatsoever.
Mm-mm.
No help whatsoever, especially because I voice text. I will dictate into my text messaging system, and then I got to go back and double check it to make sure that it's accurate.
Yeah.
Because I've said some things that, oops, that was spell check, not me.
Yeah.
But that's just me. And maybe it's a little on the anal side as far as, the O's versus zeros and those kinds of things. But um, if you're giving somebody, I mean, we've heard this before too, where you're traveling through some small town, maybe down in the South or what have you, and you're saying, can you tell me how to get to here? Well, you see, you go down to the old oak tree and then you make
Yeah.
a left, just a little bit, just a left. And then when you get to this and that, and the instructions are like hieroglyphics.
Yeah.
And,
Oh, and
you know,
you know the Vermont saying, can't get there from here.
can't get that from me. And I mean, I was born and raised in Phoenix, and I have to say that my education was pretty darn good, all in all.
Mhm.
I had some great teachers then, some not so great teachers as well. I had a second grade teacher, Mrs. Orth. I used to get buzz cuts as a kid. My mother would cut our hair, and she was actually able to grab me by my buzz cut
Whoa.
because I had walked through the classroom and I was using my hand as an airplane and I was going up and over the heads of some of the students, and she thought I was hitting them. And so she grabbed me by the buzz cut and put me in the corner. But some of the other teachers, Mrs. Larson, she would read to us in class after lunch. She, okay, if you want to lay on the floor, you can. Put your head on the desk, you can. Dim the lights. And she would read to us from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is one of the
Yeah.
books. I had a Mr. Benner in eighth grade. Mr. Richards, our shop teacher, who taught me that um, if you're involved in an altercation, you and somebody else, and even if it was their fault, you both get punished. That's
Hmm.
like, oh, that doesn't seem fair, but that's the way it was. But all through school, I know that we've all had those mentors, those people that have made a difference in our
Hmm.
lives. And I have to say that in high school, it was the biggest difference was Mr. Miller, Southwest literature class. And I wrote some fictional stories that he would mark on the paper in red pen. In red pen, this is a great story. You need to expand on it, and so on and so forth. Uh, I will, I will share one humorous moment in class. dead silence in the room. And of course, even when you were growing up, I'm sure the walls were thin, so you could hear what
Oh
was
yeah.
going on in the other room. And I don't know if we were reading or we were supposed to be writing or what, dead silence. And from the classroom next door, they were watching a film. And all of a sudden, you heard what sounded like a choir of angels. And I looked up and I looked around and I said, Judgment Day. Oh my God. Oh, we just had so much fun with that guy. I'm sure he's since passed because he was kind of old even back when we were in high school.
I know. I
But
know.
he got me on the road to writing, which is part of
Mhm.
the reason why I finally got to my book and so forth. I'm curious. You say you have other books, and as a matter of fact, I was looking through here. You have quite a number of books that are unpublished as of yet, and I'm guessing that you're probably going to eventually get them published. Do you think?
I don't know. The book on mathematics was written when I first started teaching mathematics, and in retrospect now, there was so much more that needed to be in that. And that's not, I mean, I love doing math, but not to go back. Plus, the publishing company in Chicago lost 300 pieces of good art.
Oh,
Um,
that's not
the
right.
romances, yeah. My master's thesis, nah. Um, well, there was one other one that I had done. Um, but I've done a lot of articles, a lot of essays online, and some of those I think they've gone on to my Substack and getting some looking at. But I think that's how I honed things, was just learning how to do a well-crafted essay.
Hmm.
Um, but in 1913, no, I wasn't even around then. 2013, I am so old. In 2013, I had an idea for a book. Living in Arizona, what would happen if Arizona decided to secede from the Union and become a Christian republic? Because, the rhetoric and stuff was high, even almost, well, even over 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it took me between 2013 and 2015 to finish it. And it, I sent it around to agents, and one agent looked at it and said, I know you said it's speculative fiction, but this is just way too out there. It's like,
Really?
I was talking about detention camps for kids. It's just like, rewriting the Constitution, throwing elections. And my husband would say, where is this stuff coming from? I'm a history major.
Yeah.
This is what I'm seeing out there.
Well,
But who
it's,
knows?
I mean, the years from 1980 to 95 working for the Christian radio station, I'll be honest with you, I kind of felt that maybe that's quite a possibility. But one of the things that always struck me, and again, I know this statement is about that I'm about to make, people can say, "Oh no, you meant disrespect." I mean no disrespect, no offense. But when I would listen to many of the programs talk about how they are being persecuted, on and on and on, the image that comes to mind of these groups of people standing on the railroad tracks and a train is coming and they're complaining that the train is coming and that they're going to be killed. They're being persecuted by the train. Get the
Oh
heck off the
dear.
tracks.
I
Get the heck off the tracks.
yeah.
You know?
And there's this thing called common sense. You can
Hello.
argue about it
Yeah.
after you're safe.
Yeah.
I know.
I'm not a believer anymore. I went through personal growth programs in the early 80s and then in the 90s with my first wife. And in the early 80s, victimhood was huge. And
Mhm.
I won the victimhood game. And when I say I won it, because I don't play it anymore.
Yeah.
And I won't play it anymore. And I won't let anybody tell me that they
Mhm.
did this to us or to me. Um, that's part of what my book, Choices, is about. We all make choices, and we're either 100% responsible or we're not.
Mhm.
I think you should follow through with the book. I really do. You know,
But
you can,
nobody would believe it was written
yeah,
2013 to 2015. But
yeah,
no, I just that's not going to really be helpful because it will just cause,
yeah, true. I get your
you know,
point. I get your point.
yeah.
No, and see, that's where the responsibility comes in when people start screaming about the First Amendment. It's like,
Mhm.
I think I brought this up before we started. I said, where's our personal responsibility? You want to say whatever you want? Yeah, you can. There is no argument here. You
Mhm.
absolutely can. But are you willing to take responsibility for what it might cause? Because other
Yeah.
people don't look at it the same way you do.
If it had been published in 2015, 2016,
Yeah,
it would have been an entirely different reception. It really would have
yeah,
been speculative fiction along the lines of, oh, Ray Bradbury, some of these people, everything came true,
yeah, yeah,
but no, today it would have been an in your face, how dare you say that? And it's not helpful. And my goal is, in whatever time I have left, I need to be kind and generous and
yeah,
helpful and make things better for people. I think
yeah.
that's going to be so important.
In talking about your husband and obviously my father and other family and friends that we both have lost over the years. One of the things that I find so interesting is some of the things that I have learned, in this case, in my case, about my father that I didn't know. Um, now, I found this out before he passed, but I didn't know this because I don't remember him ever telling me this. When we first moved to Santa Barbara, I became a member of a choral group that
Mm-hmm.
also broke up into quartets. This was a men's choral group, and we broke up into quartets, and I had a blast with that. It was so much fun. And it was only after I had been involved for about a year, I was talking to my dad about this. Oh yeah, you didn't know I was in a quartet back in college and so forth. I'm Richard Dugan, and you are listening to Tell Me Your Story. We're talking with Linda Moran and her book, The Perks of Hospice. And we look forward to an audible version, stories of love, life, and loss. And I want to thank you so much for joining us here on the program. This has been a wonderful conversation. I have to tell you, and I'm very excited about the prospects for you and me, and we both are in this writing mode. Once I got my first book here published, Choices, and I found out how easy it was through kdp.com. I'm thinking, I got several other books. Oh,
Yeah.
I've got a picture book. I've got photographs that I took in my
Yeah.
20s. And then I've got another book of those stories that I wrote in Southwest literature class
Oh,
that I'm
good. Your teacher would be so
yeah,
proud.
that I'm going to expand upon. That's the
Uh-huh.
second one. And there is a third one that I can't recall off the top of my head, but it'll come to me. And I know you've got a bunch of them as well. And I hope we will see and hear them down the road.
Oh, definitely. This is what I'm meant to do right now.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us. I do have three final questions that I ask
Yes.
all of my guests. I will ask those of you. And again, I thank you folks for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story. And I hope that you will tune in to the program. We're on 9 times a week, folks, believe it or not. Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., 9 a.m. on Wednesday, and then Sunday, 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., and Monday, 1 a.m. Streaming live at all those times at richarddugan.com with podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM. We're on YouTube where you can watch these conversations. I hope you'll subscribe and I hope that you will click notification. Just a reminder that in addition to the perks of hospice being available on Amazon and other outlets, so is Choices, 5 Steps for Life. I hope you'll get a copy at Amazon. There's a link on my website, richarddugan.com, where you can go straight to the Amazon page for Choices. And also ask that if you can support the work we're doing financially, we would be gratefully appreciative. We have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. There's also a link on my website, richarddugan.com, to that PayPal site. And so whatever you can support us with, thank you, thank you, thank you for those who have and for those who have will help. And finally, we also ask that you take time during the decade of perfect vision, to spend some time going within and listening to that still small voice. And with those statements being made, all of that, we go to our final three questions for our guest. And the first of those is, who is Linda Moran?
She's somebody who's been searching a long time for what her purpose is. It took her a long time to realize that she was meant to teach, and then realized how much she loved it.
Hmm.
And she now is just searching. So it's a new life. It's a solo life
Hmm.
with travel and writing and reading and getting back to art, which I really, really miss.
What gets you up in the morning?
Well, besides the alarm, um, in the summer, I'm up with the sun because it's up so early, like 5 a.m.
Hmm.
But lately, because I've got this new project and I've started artwork again and drawing, that gets me up because I want to get to it. And I'm reading all kinds of interesting things. So a lot of times I get up and I sit in my bed for an hour and just read to start the day. And I like that.
Hmm. And finally, what was your best day?
I think the day I married my husband.
Hmm. Well,
First
we
day I
thank.
think I truly knew what happiness was.
Hmm. Well, we thank you for sharing your story and his with us here on Tell Me Your Story. And we hope that we'll have a chance to chat with you again down the road with some of your other works that you're putting together, including your artwork.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a delight. I love doing these kinds of things, and just never really knowing where you're going to go and just enjoying the ride.
Well, as I've often said to my guests as well as our listeners and viewers, the universe asks the questions. I'm just along for the ride. And I thank you for taking the ride with me today. And I thank you for joining us here on Tell Me Your Story, watching and listening. And until our next broadcast, podcast, video cast, love to law. Jeanette, I am still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. Smokey, I'll see you on the other side. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.